We're here. The band is back together. Daz and Seb in studio. We did our customary shit talking that can't go on the air before clicking record, and now we're here for the formalities. Sorry, audience, but yeah, we talked some good shit. It was therapeutic, I thought.
I'm kind of shocked that Seb showed up for the show after being on Peter's show. Like, I thought it was kind of a toss-up if he would actually show up here, but good on his word, he did. You know, he's still not too big for his britches over there in the Canadian North. So thanks for showing up, Seb.
Rose before, I'm not going to finish that sentence, but I'm here for you guys.
You're a hoe, Peter. That's what he just said.
No,
yeah,
here first.
I massively appreciate the opportunity, but I love these conversations.
Seb was saying that Peter flew him coach on Spirit, and that's why he had like 4 missed flights, canceled flight, and like delays. Peter, you're really going to have to splurge a little bit more than that on these guests, man. It's not, if we're going to fly people out, it's first class, United or American only, right then, or maybe Qatar Airlines even.
That's why we don't fly. We could easily afford to fly people out, wine them and dine them, Josh, but we don't, just because we're not quite able to do first class yet. But once we can,
we'll do nothing less than that. No Spirit, no Frontier, no regional.
No, it sounded like a good experience, Seb. Huh? You got to talk to the man himself, and you did great in the episode as always. And what an important message you have. Just a quick anecdote. I know you were on here a few weeks ago, but how's the book continue to do, and how are your spirits and feelings with a lot of momentum on this thing?
It honestly, it has been such an incredible journey. I did not expect the response that I got. Like, it's one of those things that's it's kind of nerve-wracking putting your thoughts out there. As you guys know, having a podcast, like when you share what it is that you're thinking and then you get pushback on it and then you get people kind of resonating with it, it's a really, really humbling experience. But I've just been blown away
when you do that, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Very.
Yeah, and especially when you open the book up about your childhood experiences and your parental relationship and stuff. So I've been blown away. And so I really appreciate the community. It's just been such a cool experience.
It's awesome. Daz, what's up with you, dude? I just want to hear a quick Daz update
I'm just riding the coattails of one SEB Bunny, man. I'm just along for the ride. I know who to hitch my star to. So going good over here. Fiat world ramping up, but still busy at the grind. Looking forward. Seb and I are very lucky to be able to go to Madeira next week, so we're super looking forward to that.
That's awesome. Wait, what are you working on in your fiat job? Just quick update. We talk Bitcoin all the time, and what project are you in the middle of?
So I do standalone power systems. So where we've got really long lines of what we call SWIR network, single wire earth return, poles and wires that go out to the middle of Queensland. So kilometres and kilometres serving one small load like a cattle station or communications towers. We're pulling those poles and wires out. We're putting solar batteries and diesel generators in. And it's a bit of a project to see if it's worthwhile doing in lieu of poles and wires, because traditionally, as like these technologies evolve and they get a little bit cheaper, and we're just looking at, does it make sense to be going in repairing these poles and wires every 4 years, or should we spend a bit more up front, plant something down, and that's a full self-sustaining little microgrid for these customers. So
that's pretty cool as hell. Do you like your job, Daz? Like, as you zoom out and think about your life, how do you feel about your main job and career at this stage?
I love my job.
Therapist question. That's very pointed.
Yes. How does it make me feel? No, I love my job. What I wish is that I could opt in a little bit more in and around the time. So as things evolve, and like, because Bitcoin and everything we do at Looking Glass and everything tends to take a little bit more time. So it's finding a balance between that. I can do a lot after hours because, like, this is before work right now, right? So I can time my day in and around that fiat life. But ideally, it would be a balance moving forward where I could roll back from the fiat life a little bit more and lean a little bit more into the energy side of what Bitcoin can mean for energy grids. But it's a balance. And I think while I love my job, if I could do Bitcoin and energy together, that's the niche, right? So that's the dream.
One day.
That's the dream fit. Yeah, for sure. I think this next cycle, this is what I love about Bitcoin more than anything. I think Bitcoin buys people opportunity. And this ties in with a lot of the messaging around Seb's book and the messages around what money does. And for me, it buys me optionality. It buys me the ability to point my efforts and my energy towards something that I love, and I think that's what you do. You hustle now, you put it aside, you put it into a savings vehicle that by fundamental rights is pretty easy to understand, and you park it for the longer term, and then you can come back and revisit and say, okay, now my net worth has appreciated. Now I'm able to afford myself to point my energies towards other things that I love, and that things that resonate with me. And I think that's a beautiful thing about why we're all here. And I think we all share on that mission for wage earners, in particular, your blue collar boys, blue collar Bitcoin listeners, is this will give you optionality. You don't have to necessarily, I will never retire. That's never what it's about. I enjoy the hustle too much, but it just allows me to focus those energies on what's resonating with me, and that's really why I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. You could point your energy at something that really gives you some passion to be chasing, not sitting in some cubicle staring at a gray wall and hating your life, Like everyone's got some kind of passion or work that they do enjoy or hobbies or something, but this is something that gives you optionality into the future, hopefully sooner than later. But you don't have to continue a job that you absolutely despise,
exactly.
Which is just not something anyone should have to do.
And it gives people hope. If even if you're in that job now that you don't necessarily love, but if you just hustle and grind and you can put away that excess for the longer term, that optionality is coming. And that's where we it's a bit of a meme, but we say Bitcoin is hope, and that's absolutely what it is. It's like, I have to hustle now, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. In the fiat system, you're still on that grind, on that hustle, but there's not that light at the end of the tunnel saying there's optionality at the end if you just stay the course right now. And that's really, a pretty profound statement that it's easy to say, harder to get. And I think that's where most people, the light hits. And this is why we're always advocating for only put in, if you're new here, only put in what you can absolutely afford to ride out for 4 years and then come back. And it's after that 4-year cycle, if you've only been sort of dipping your toe in, that you come to the realization that, holy shit, how much has my purchasing and what options are available to me now, and what would have happened had I just abstained from, spending in excess. I don't need the 5 Netflix streaming services subscriptions. One might do, and you start really coming back to these fundamental basics around saving and that optionality that it then buys you, makes you have this epiphany of like, wow, if I only hustled a little bit harder, right? And this is where I think it ties into all that stuff that Seb was talking about in this book around how money then infiltrates all of these things downstream of how we come up and how we show up in the world and how we navigate society, from consumerism and the environment, and all of these things are all tied in downstream effects of money. And when you aren't incentivized to save, you're incentivized to enjoy the moment. So you're incentivized to increase consumption because you need to say, my hustle is worth something. Oh, I've bought this pretty shiny new thing to hang on the mantelpiece, and that's where you're finding your value. But if you're able to actually direct that into something that actually buys you optionality over the longer term, then it shifts your whole focus on how you show up and how you navigate the world and what we see value in.
Totally. I was going to just throw in an anecdote and say, I think the hard thing to assess, right? There's probably people listening to this pod that are dissatisfied with their job, have dream jobs. Some of the more hardcore Bitcoiners may want to go work in Bitcoin and have those aspirations. I think there's something healthy about hearing you just say a couple minutes ago, I like my job. It's not perfect. I have future goals and aspirations, but my job's okay. And I don't have an answer here, but it's hard to assess in life and in your career trajectory what is a phase and what is a legit consideration to switch. So for me, I got out of college, I went to PGA management school, and I managed a golf course and taught golf lessons. And about 5 years into doing that, my wife and I went through like basically a full year where I was trying to figure out, am I just in the first trough of a really good career, or is this career not the best fit for me? And that is not an easy answer, and that takes time to marinate. And I guess I would encourage people, let it marinate and don't hastily quit something that keeps the lights on and allows you to save money, right? If you're cash flow positive and you have a decent job, take some time, consult some people in your life that have some wisdom, and try to be really balanced and objective. Because man, there's so many people in our generation and generations below that just have the attention span of a gnat when it comes to their vocation. And they're just fucking hopping all over the place. And if we're just talking nuts and bolts, X's and O's, that has huge financial consequences. There are rewards to sticking with a viable career, matching your expenditures to it, and buying scarce assets.
Dan, you and I were on the ambulance together, like, I don't know, about a month ago. And we had this conversation about how much money would you have to have banked right now to just flat out quit today. Like, you get that 2 a.m. ambulance call where some old lady shit all over herself and you have to pick her up. She weighs 300 pounds. And you're like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm done. I'm leaving right now. And we went back and forth for like half an hour about this. And I think what I came to the conclusion of was, I'm not sure I would, because there's so much social activity that goes on in and out the firehouse. And Daz, I'm sure you've got guys you work with that you like. They're like brothers to you. You hang out at the firehouse. It's very similar, maybe even more so. It's your social life interconnected there. There's so much of your identity that you would be ripping off of yourself and discarding. And I don't think it would be healthy for most people to just, especially if you don't have something bigger to do, something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't have like a God or something larger than yourself that you recognize as the passion to pursue, and you just decide, it reminds me of Office Space when he's like, what would you do if you had $1 million? He's like, nothing. I would do nothing at all. Like, if you're that guy, you're probably not going to make it past 5 years, because it's going to be like a heroin overdose, or you're going to probably kill yourself because you realize you're living an empty life.
Yep. For sure.
Got a little dark at the end there.
Dude, I mean, the numbers we were coming up with, Josh, they were outrageously high.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and yeah, the grass ain't always greener. We were also saying it takes me like 3 or 4 days in an all-inclusive resort to say, man, this has been a great trip, but I couldn't do this for more than a week or two without going crazy.
Right. How long can you look at fat people in bikinis, you know?
A while. Oh, wow. I can have fun sipping cocktails next to my wife, making fun of fat people for quite some time. But yeah, that would run out.
It gets old eventually.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, that was a great first 12 minutes here. I think our thought was we're just going to go around. This is a popcorn rip session. And boy, am I excited. We're just going to go around dude to dude, throw out a topic. 4 of us will riff on it for a few minutes, and then we'll go to the next guy. Daz or Seb, kick us off with a topic, Bitcoin or not, and we'll go from there.
Sweet. I'll give it a go. So I was on a pod. It was a new pod. I think it may have even been his first episode. And the guy mentioned just a little anecdote that I thought was just fascinating. Now, I have not heard the anecdote directly, and I think it is from Turdemeister. So I want to make sure that I'm not just kind of like taking credit for this. But it was this idea that if you're like a high performing, let's say Olympian athlete, but all you're eating is freaking McDonald's, how can you ever expect to perform at like your maximum or really kind of like reach your full potential? And the reality is that is the world at which we're living in. The food at which we're consuming is our money, and our money is just absolute garbage. And so we're not really maximizing our potential of society. We have a money that is losing value over time. It's causing cost of living to rise. It's incentivizing people to go and take risk. It's incentivizing people to flood into assets. It's incentivizing people to constantly try and have to work more just to be able to get ahead. And so it's altering how we are showing up in the world. And like, to give one quick example would be like, money is meant to serve like 3 functions: a store of value, a medium of exchange, a unit of account. Let's just focus on that store of value for a second. If money does not act as a store of value, then people are going to seek value, that storage, elsewhere. So what do? They go and pile into equities, they go pile into real estate, they go pile into bonds. So we see house prices absolutely skyrocket, and everyone's like, sweet, my house is going up. It's like, no, your house isn't going up. The currency is going down. That is what's really happening. And so ultimately, it makes property completely out of reach for the average person. And I think like in my book, I touched on it very quickly, which is something like the baby boomer generation at 30 years old owns something like 35% of the housing market. The millennial generation at 30 years old owns 3% of the housing market. It's
wow.
Because, like, assets.
Wait, where'd you hear? If you don't, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but where did you hear that again?
This is there's a, what is it? In the book, I cite it, but I think it's a New York Times or a Wall Street article. I can back that up. It's fascinating.
That's very recent data too.
That is
Like,
that is an
Wow.
incredible comment. Yeah.
But I think what it's showing is that our money is not fulfilling its purpose. It is not a store of value. So it's incentivizing all this alternate behavior where people are simply trying to hedge against debasement. It's forcing them into paths at which they may not necessarily take. And not only that, because they're being forced into these paths of funneling capital into assets, they're becoming unachievable to most people. And so the average person they're struggling with rent. They're no longer able to buy a house to support their family. So it's kind of altering how we're showing up in the world. And so anyway, going back to kind of my initial point is if you're an athlete and all you're eating is McDonald's, how can we ever reach our full potential? And this is kind of the world we're living in. We've got this world where we have some incredible minds that are able to help progress humanity, whether it's through science, whether it's through technology. But all of this is being captured by a broken monetary system, which is just sucking away all of our potential to be able to create, to collaborate, to actually add value to society. And I think it's interesting. We don't really think too much about how money really is this kind of this energy that can shape who we are. It alters how we show up in the world. So I thought we'd kind of riff on that with a few different ideas.
Yeah. You mentioned with Peter that I think you said in Whistler, 60% of the real estate is empty or just dormant because those are used as investment properties. That is such an insane number. And I really do wonder on the scale of like the US in general, how many properties are being used that are just totally vacant, that are completely being used for investment properties. I wish I would have looked that up before this because that would have been more interesting, but it's wild that we're just building these empty properties simply to store value because our money is so broken.
Yeah.
That's like the Australian market too. And unfortunately, I don't have any stats to back it up, but we treat property like a pristine store of value here. It's actually really problematic in the major cities. Like you're living in studio apartments that are selling for multiples of millions of dollars. And how can you be a retail worker and not expect to travel 2 hours either side of your day just to work in these cities? And our whole monetary policy, our whole government policy is built around boosting this construction industry because we've really only got mining and construction. They're the two things. So what we're starting to see now is they've opened the floodgates for immigration as well because they're trying to introduce more demand to try and keep this property market boosted and try and keep the construction market boosted. And so it's artificially, again, government intervention pulling on the levers of controls to try and keep the underlying, because a lot of our retirement accounts, a lot of our investment, from our boomers who inherited, 40 years of declining interest rates, it's so highly levered to the real estate market that they absolutely cannot allow that to pop. And what we're starting to see is a lot of mortgage stress. So I think the latest figures I saw was something like 60% of Australians are under mortgage stress at the moment. So to think that real estate over a longer term is a safe place for you to park your wealth, it's so risky at the moment. Like, what we say is in these high inflationary environments is that hard assets will do well. But the trick is, how do you find a hard asset and not get levered, multiples upon your wage? And that's where I think real estate in particular in Australia, and I think globally, is really at risk of this paradigm between it always being a safe investment. It's like, hang on, we got high inflation, we got interest rates that are creeping up towards that inflation, and it's still largely sustained. Yes, inflation's come down a little bit, but the real interest rates are still lagging behind that inflation rate, but they're higher, and it's putting more pressure on these mortgage stress levels. And at any moment, that bubble can pop, and we see corrections in the real estate market. People getting washed out. They're highly levered. They're going to get margin called on those loans. It's a really, really dangerous on the precipice of this potential cascade in the downfall of real estate, which would completely decimate the middle class, because people use real estate because they can understand it. Like typically, in Australia, we had decades worth of double. You could basically, for 10 years up until before 2008, you could guarantee your property price was going to double over a 10-year period. People get that. They can understand that. They can grok that. They can't go, if they're looking for alternative investments, they don't get how to value equities. They don't get how to do rebalance sheets and statements and cash flow statements and debt to equity ratios. What does that even mean? And discount cash flow analysis. How do they navigate that? But they understand real estate. So that's where most of our money is getting funneled into real estate as a pseudo store of value, where money should serve that purpose. And this is really back to that argument around why we Bitcoin, is because it's for fucking dumb people like me. Like a Sparky shouldn't know how to do discount cash flow analysis. It just shouldn't. And I should just be able to park my money and come back at a later date and an increase in purchasing power.
Have you been paying attention the last few years? If so, you know one thing. Not your keys, not your coins. This is a quaint saying, but it's real. If you're not holding your seed keys, you have a Bitcoin IOU, not Bitcoin. CoinKite is the maker of the Cold Card Mark IV. This is the industry standard for holding the keys to your Bitcoin. Holding your keys should not be intimidating, and it isn't. The Mark IV makes this an incredibly simple process. You could be a degenerate firefighter and hold your own keys. That's how simple it is. If you want to create a more complex setup, the Cold Card Mark IV has you covered there as well. You can create a multi-sig using a cold card, a tap signer, and even the upcoming Q1. Speaking of the Q1, if you want to have every bell and whistle and give yourself no boundaries as far as interacting with Bitcoin is concerned, the Q1 is your signing device. CoinKite makes some of the most sought-after gear in Bitcoin. The block clock, seed plates, the open dime, and the Sats card. Everything you need to secure your Bitcoin. Use code BCB for 5% off the Mark IV.
I find it fascinating that, and you touched on it very briefly, which is the speculation aspect. Bitcoin always gets the argument, well, Bitcoin's just a speculative asset. And the reality is that I think, yes, at some point, real estate has not been super speculative, because if you'd bought a long-term rental property, you can cover all your expenses and generate cash flow from long-term rentals. And then over time, that switched where you couldn't really do it on long-term rentals. You could only do it on nightly rentals. And then no longer can you do it on nightly rentals. Now, if you want to make money on property, the only way you're going to make money on property is bet that it's going to appreciate in value. And so property is now the most speculative of all assets. Like, at least when you're looking at Bitcoin, Bitcoin has immense utility value. You're able to transact peer-to-peer. You've got a trustless, permissionless currency. You're able to move money cross borders without intermediaries. Like, unbelievable utility value. And when it comes to property these days, people are simply trying to store wealth, and they're betting that the property price is going to go up.
Yeah. Hey, I've got a question about mortgages in Australia or in Canada, because obviously we're not there. Peter McCormick has talked a lot about how his mortgage in the UK is not like a 30-year fixed, the way like most people in the US get a 30-year fixed. Is that a possibility in Australia, or how does it work there?
5-year
fixed and then it's floating?
Yeah.
Wow.
No,
So that's very interesting.
You would
that
renew
just
the term.
applies pressure so much quicker. Like, you guys are basically in a pressure cooker right now. As this thing, say you have like a 2% from a couple of years ago.
Most people don't opt in for fixed either, because they've engineered those fixed rates over the time to make it way more attractive to maintain a variable. So even 5 years is a bit of an anomaly. The typical fixed term period would be 3, 5 at a sort of max. I saw this coming. I took a 5-year. Still got a mortgage. I took a 5-year fixed, and I've got maybe 3.5 years left to go, and I locked it in at 2.6%. I'm one of the lucky ones, because I sort of saw inflation and going, interest rates have to catch up. Even if I don't, I'm going to bet here, and my downfall is I go from 2.6 to 0. I miss out on that upside, but I don't know where the downside is, of that bet. So I was lucky in that sense. But again, like in 3.5 years, I'm going to have to sit down and reassess and go, right, now where's my energy's best, what's my opportunity cost for the money that I'm now saving? So it is a pressure cooker. You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. And most people are already feeling that pain because they're already on that variable rate. But then as people do start rolling off these fixed, it's just going to it's not going to get better anyway, put it that way.
Interesting.
And that's kind of
I wish we could get 30-year fix. I would have locked that.
Yeah, I was going to say before you go, I can't impress how much different it is for us here. And I mean, Josh and I sometimes feel bad. Because we're at an age in a spot where we both bought houses before things got squirrely and refied down to low rates, and we're locked in at 30 years. And it's interesting to hear how much different and how much quicker rate dynamics are going to impact other populations. I didn't fully put that together.
Yeah, I didn't think about that either. Think about shorting REITs, international REITs, dude. We need to be shorting the hell out of those things right now.
The thing that's interesting, though, from the banking perspective, though, of a 30-year mortgage, like if you are, let's just say, Dan, you take out a 30-year mortgage, like many times the banks are borrowing on the short end and lending on the long end and capturing the spread between the two.
Yeah.
And so the challenge they face is that if they're lending out for 30 years and all of a sudden rates spike, they're screwed. They can't actually capture any profit. So it creates a ton of like structural instability within the US banking system. And that's where, like, to your point, Josh, that you mentioned, the moment our term expires, so like let's say you've got a 3-year term like Daz has it, or a 5-year term at say 3%.
So just to be clear, things are exactly the same in Canada. You can't get like a 30-year.
They're the same in New Zealand. They're the same in the UK. They're the same in Australia. They're the same in like pretty much every country I've ever been
such sloppy
in.
hogs in the US, man.
I've never seen in any other country a country that allows for like 30-year fixed terms. That's just mind blowing. And the moment your term is up, then you can renew. But the thing is that you risk, and this is what's happened here, is that let's take the pandemic, for instance. We saw house prices absolutely skyrocket into the pandemic because of all of that injection of capital. So we saw house prices, let's say, double. A house price has gone from 500 to $1 million. So all of a sudden you've got this $1 million house and everyone is like, oh my God, am I going to be able to afford a house in a few years' time? I've got to get into the market right now. So what do they go and do? They go and put down 5% down on a property. So they've got 95% mortgage at 1 million. And then all of a sudden they lock into, let's say, a 2 or 3 year mortgage, or they can't even afford the fixed rate. So they go with the variable rate when interest rates are at 2.5%. And all of a sudden we then see the Fed or the central bank go and jack up rates. These people that have got 95% mortgage that have been squeezed to get into the property have now just seen their interest payments double or triple. And so this is where the economy is just on its knees right now, because people are defaulting left, right, and center because they can't afford their interest payments because they bought in when house prices were rising, but interest rates were 2.5%, 3%.
Yeah. I was going to throw in a quick thought about your McDonald's analogy, a word of caution, maybe, to play the other side for a second, especially at a date and time right now where we just saw the S&P 500 hit all-time highs. Many people in this space said in this rate environment that things were going to crash. People were taking short positions that were ill-advisable. People were exiting the market that never should have. My point is that obviously I've spent hours on here talking about how artificial the 2020s economy is, but it is still possible for an athlete to consume McDonald's and still be really good. If Patrick Mahomes eats an excess of McDonald's, I assure you he's still going to be an elite NFL quarterback. He's just that talented. So this maybe flies in the face of people that say value investing's completely dead, for example, but it is still possible for companies, sectors, and markets to increase in value and productivity, even in an excessive McDonald's environment where fiat's a little flimsy. And yes, there's a lot of artificiality, but the entire thing isn't artificial. There's still a lot of people out there with new ideas, building new things, rowing in proper directions. And I guess my takeaway or my thesis of that comment is be careful expecting that the sky is going to continue falling. Maybe it will this year or next year, but a lot of people in this space have looked pretty stupid and probably lost a lot of money expecting things to unwind much quicker than they will.
He's the perfect example of that. He's been calling the sky falling for 30 years, investing in gold, which, did pretty well, 15 years ago. But if you've been investing in gold for the last 10 to 15 years, like your returns are dog shit. Yeah. It's just the reality of it.
I do agree. And this all comes back down to, again, I guess the understanding and education of the risk, the inherent risk, like in all of these things. And I think like most people underestimated the financial engineering that's possible. Like, we were looking for that quote unquote quantitative easing branding again, but there was other ways that they can inject liquidity, not call it quantitative easing, but it essentially still boils down to financial fuckery in the underlying. And this then, it always ends up on the plebs. Always ends up on the, it's not direct. It's not instantaneous. They don't just inject liquidity and we get inflation. It's this introducing of more monetary units, which absolutely has to, at some point, in some way, shape or form, show up in debasement. And if it shows up in asset prices normally first, and this is where, as wage earners, we can't save in assets. We've got to save in dollars. So it keeps getting further and further away, and our ability to obtain assets becomes harder and harder and harder. And then it's at what point does that no longer work? What point does that liquidity no longer work? And at what point does the overarching currency lose faith? And that's really the biggest risk in my mind is we've been wrong. I've been saying to people, don't invest in equities. Like, it's too hard to navigate. But like Dan points out, S&P just keeps pumping and pumping and pumping. So we've been wrong. But we're also been right in the respect that it is really fucking hard to navigate and really hard to know where your risk is. Now, people who benefit most from asset appreciation have a lot of resources to throw at keeping an eye on and a finger on the pulse. And this is where, at what point do you get out? I sure as shit know that they're going to know when to get out before you do. And
just watch what Nancy Pelosi does. When Nancy Pelosi sells her portfolio, it's time to walk, boys.
Isn't there a Twitter account that watches her portfolio or her buys and sells? Yeah. And that's the danger, man. Like, honestly, it's like, March 2020, I pulled everything I owned out into cash because this world lockdown, I'm like, it cannot function from here. It cannot. I just want to sit in cash until I know where I'm going to go. Discovered Bitcoin, went, okay, I'm going to park a good portion of that into Bitcoin because I saw it as a hard asset without counterparty risk. And that's really what it boiled down to. And I didn't want to get in over-levered positions with real estate. I knew the thesis around investing in a hard asset, took a bit of gold, took a bit of silver, took a bit of Bitcoin, and like, I need to see how this thing plays out. And then they just started the money printer up, and I didn't get back into that, the ASX 200 and the S&P 500, those indexes through my retirement accounts, and I watched them go. But I knew it was artificially pumped, and I knew that it's an unsustainable path moving forward, and just keep retesting that hypothesis around what's going to best serve me and what do I understand and what am I going to be able to keep my finger on the pulse with in order to know I indeed need to pull out.
That's a really important point. And I think something that people should take into consideration. Like, I consider myself, I pay attention to Bitcoin like a hawk. I think we all do. The four of us pay attention to this more than any other investment vehicle we own, probably. For everything else, for me, it's index funds because I don't have the bandwidth to be, looking at 4Qs for X, Y, and Z company and picking individual stocks. Like, this is just a very simple play for me. Own as much Bitcoin as I feel comfortable owning, and then ride the S&P and a couple other index funds. It's that simple. It really is. This is not financial advice.
Yeah. Well, and I think to give a little bit of clarity around there, it is that, and I really appreciate your point, Dan, and that's where, when I look at Bitcoin, to me, I'm looking at it philosophically in the bigger picture. I'm not just like, how can I look at this world through the lens of fear and how do I just get ahead? And that's not what we're referring to. We're not talking about just go and put all your money in Bitcoin and hope that it goes up in value. What we're looking for is like, how do we actually create a better world that realigns the incentives so that we're actually working together and actually collaborating and adding value? And I think that the problem with our fiat world right now, to the analogy of kind of the McDonald's, is that because costs are constantly rising, let's just say costs rise by 10% a year. Either I have to increase the amount I'm working by 10% a year or beg for a pay rise of 10% a year just to be able to maintain my same standard of living. So constantly our time is being extracted from us. It's getting harder and harder and harder. And that's where I think if we were in, say, a Bitcoinized world, it flips everything on its head. When you've got a society that is adding value, when you've got a society that technology is advancing, productivity is increasing, but then you have a fixed pie of capital, all of a sudden our purchasing power increases. And that's where I think life gets easier as opposed to harder because prices fall as opposed to prices rise. And so I think it's just, I'm thinking more bigger picture as opposed to saying, okay, we're in the fiat world. How do I get out of my situation right now? Go invest 100% in Bitcoin. That's not what I'm saying. It's more like, how do we create a world that actually realigns the incentives? How do we create a world that allows us to fuel human productivity and value creation?
And the only way to bring that about is for people to choose to opt out, educate themselves and opt out with a portion. It only takes a portion of people's net wealth into Bitcoin to really make a change. And I think this is where circles back on this argument about how we then show up, right? And it comes back to like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and that self-actualization. Once you've feathered your nest, you've built up a nice foundation for yourself and you gain opportunity. through your purchasing power, then you can point your energies towards very altruistic things. And we as humans are altruistic beings. And this is where I think the argument gets lost with having to brand it like socialism or capitalism and all of those things that, the arguments that then say they can't coexist, where I absolutely think they can. Like, we are altruistic people. Once we get that to that self-actualization, we're going to give back. And I think that's where we're going to choose to point our capital and our purchasing power and our energies towards bringing about this better world. And we're going to be able to do that through capital appreciation, not through the Cantillon effect, where the closer you are to the money spigot and the lobbyists and the better relationships you can make at the political and elite level, then you get access to the money first and you shape the world how you want. Whereas we're going to be able to create that purchasing power through value. You have to provide value to get value back. And then whereas I think, this is why I love this community so much, because I think we think and see the world very similarly. You can meet a Bitcoiner and within about 5 minutes already feel like you're best friends, because we see the world from the very same lens of, you can't create value from nothing. You have to create value. And then in doing so, those ideals then begin to shape the world that we see around us. And as our appreciation and our purchasing power appreciates, we're then able to direct those energies. And you can call it lobbying if you like, and it will be a pseudo lobbying, but we'll be wealthier, have a lot more purchasing power, and will be a lot more attuned to what it takes for the value creation of the expenditure of that money and use it for the betterment of society, I believe.
Yeah. And my closer here on this topic is just cautioning against an all or nothing mentality. I think to characterize the evolution of my worldview, it is me, and some people may call this flimsy and gray and limp, but really railing against dogmatism and all or nothing mentalities. We have recorded every single week, Josh, for almost 3 years. We've been studying Bitcoin. We're in our 7th year. I'm a firm believer in the value proposition of this protocol. For the entirety of that time period, every paycheck I get, I have bought diversified equity, and I continue to do that. And I own a lot of equity in my net worth. And so the point I make there is, maybe I'm a fiat cuck, but I'm a Bitcoiner and I still play the legacy system. And I caution whatever the Bitcoin community is or whatever it means against this all or nothing mindset. This sort of like hardcore, like, are you in or are you out, dude? And it's just not healthy. We talked last week some about religion, and I think I'll harp on it again because it's a big part of my background. The biggest complaint I had against evangelical Christianity growing up was the entire incentive structure pushes people to an all or nothing mentality, towards excess certainty, towards in-out ideology, towards biblical inerrancy, things that I think are all incredibly flimsy logically. Not that Christianity doesn't have anything to offer, but all or nothing, dogmatic, fully certain Christianity is extremely hollow, and I argue toxic. But I get why it proliferates, because it's the belief system trying to defend itself. Are you with us or are you against us? You know what I mean? Like, you own fiat shit? Fuck you. You have a little bit of an Ethereum position? Fuck you. Whatever whatever it is. People are looking to put up these fences. Let people do their thing, right? Care less about what others are doing. Focus more on your own agenda, and let's become less of a cult and be more objective, in my opinion. Get off that hierarchy game, man. We as humans, we just have this tendency for hierarchies, no matter what. Like Bitcoin, there's a hierarchy here. Christianity, there's a clear hierarchy there. Every single cult that's ever existed, there's a hierarchy, and there's somebody telling you, how to cut your fingernails the right way and put on the purple shoes and cut your nuts off so that you're a eunuch. Like, every single one of these things has a hierarchy that you follow these rules properly and you're going to get to nirvana or heaven or whatever it is, or you're going to be rich someday with Bitcoin. But it's all just these games we construct for ourselves as humans. It's another one of these, it's just another one of these. So it's good to kind of pull yourself back and realize the self-actualization that you said, Daz.
that comes from having like a solid foundation, whether it's the monetary system or a healthy hierarchy that you understand isn't, there's no negative eventualities that come out of just doing your fiat job, buying some Bitcoin, and not being a religious zealot about anything if you can help it.
What is up, folks? It's Dan here, and I'm going to take just a quick moment to talk to you about where Josh and I buy our Bitcoin, and that is at Swan Bitcoin. The two of us have now been dollar cost averaging on Swan for years, and here's why. It's user-friendly. The fees are low and transparent. Withdrawals are absolutely free. They offer attentive expert service, and Swan has a full suite of financial services, including an IRA product where you can roll a traditional or a Roth IRA into Bitcoin, Swan Private for high net worth individuals, and coming soon, Swan Vault for collaborative custody. In our view, Swan just gets it. They're focused on Bitcoin only. They provide really solid and ongoing education, and they strongly encourage self-custody. Maybe most importantly, it's low friction. Setting up and accessing a Swan account is so easy that it's boomer and firefighter proof. Keep that stack thick. That's THIC, no K at the end, at swan.com.
Bitcoin 2024 is moving to the heart of Bitcoin country, Nashville. Nashville just feels like the proper place for a Bitcoin conference. I can't guarantee we will be on main stage, or side stage, or even performing a puppet show. I can, however, say that we will be hanging out with the plebes, and if we have no obligations, we will very likely be getting drunk. Bitcoin Magazine is introducing a new event this spring, Bitcoin Asia. It's shaping up to be an unmissable experience. Stay tuned for more info. Whether you want to visit Bitcoin Asia or Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, we have a coupon code for you. Use coupon code BCB for 10% off any ticket to either event. That's code BCB.
I think it's really... Sorry, Sebi.
Where you go?
I was just going to say, I can only speak for myself, but had I found Bitcoin in my 20s, single before marriage, I probably would have been balls deep, 100%. Let's go, let's ride this baby. But as you get a bit older, there's people who depend on you, me being, the primary wage earner. There's always that thought in the back of your mind, what if you're fucking wrong, Daz? You're a dumb sparky. Again, it's like you shouldn't know how to do discount cash flow, so maybe you've overthought something here, right? So I'm not 100% Bitcoin, never have been, never will be. But what I've found is that my allocation, as a percentage of my portfolio over time, as the net worth starts to appreciate, it's becoming a larger and larger piece of that pie. And I think that'll continue to grow.
Yeah.
And then it comes to the point of, if I'm following all of the traditional investment rules, maybe I should take some off the table and diversify somewhat. But I sit there and I look around, I go, I don't know what else to fucking buy. I'm only going to want to sell Bitcoin to buy more Bitcoin at this point in time. But I don't want to ever leave my beautiful little children and my beautiful wife a problem. If something happens to me tomorrow and they don't necessarily know how to or want to keep their finger on the pulse with this thing, like we've all agreed that we do, or if I'm wrong and something comes out of the blue and this leap in quantum computing would have completely fucked the SHA-256 algorithm, leave my little family high and dry, that's just not how I manage risk. That's just not me. And I 100% agree. It's like that dogmatic view of you have to be 100%. You're on the bus, you're on the bus. I guarantee most of those are little fucking computer nerds sitting in their basements, living in their mum's basement, sitting on a big stack of Bitcoin without any real notion of what it takes to navigate and raise a family and, provide for other humans. And I would, and that's probably a blanket statement. I'll probably get grilled and thrown rotten tomatoes at, but I firmly believe that if there's other dependence on you, you can't be that sure. You absolutely cannot be that sure. And I would just, everyone's risk tolerance is different. If you're 100% Bitcoin and you know all this and you know all the trade-offs, absolutely happy for you. But I don't think it's creating an environment where we're going to onboard another 7 billion people by being that dogmatic against people's optionality. And I think most people are on the same path. For newcomers, it's like you've got to dip it. You can't go 100% in. You will shit the bed. When you have that 20% drawdown in 2 days, you will shit the bed and you will sell everything and you won't even revisit it. So the best way to go is to dip your toe in, try the water out, get comfy, yeah, okay, maybe I might go up to my nipples, you know.
The Barstool guy's a perfect example of that. What's his name?
Dave Portnoy.
Portnoy. Yeah, he bought, sold, basically at the worst possible times, and he's not. I mean, he's not a dummy. He's been very successful.
Davey day trader.
Exactly, but he just doesn't have number one. He doesn't have the education, and he doesn't have the ball sack, obviously. So I mean, that's just it, and that's what most people will do.
Fuck myself on Bitcoin. Fuck, it's at 52,000. I fucked myself on Bitcoin. I'll link that tweet in the notes. It's legendary.
I think before moving on as well, I just wanted to add one point, which is like we are a product of our environment. And I think that there are always going to be people, whether you come from poverty, that are able to rise above the environment to which you're in. But the environment does shape us. You know what I mean? Like if we're in a very hard environment, it's very hard, as Daz mentioned, like in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've got to meet your basic survival needs, your shelter needs to be able to actually live. Only then can you start to think about relationships. Only then can you start to think about enjoyment, physical activity, self-actualization. And so this is where I think the environment in which we live in is a very hard environment. And I think that sometimes we can latch onto things like Bitcoin, thinking that Bitcoin is going to fix everything. Bitcoin is going to make my life a hell of a lot better. Oh my God, look at the future of Bitcoin. And I think the reality is that happiness is not external. I know our fiat world makes it feel like happiness is external. I just need the newest pair of shoes, the newest car, or the house. But the reality is that happiness is it's fleeting, and it is very much an internal state. You have to love yourself and work on yourself. And if you're not doing the internal work, it doesn't matter how much money your Bitcoin is worth. You're still not going to be happy.
Yeah. To insert an example that Josh and I have been talking about too, our department's in the middle of lieutenant's testing. So people are participating in this lieutenant's test. I'm one of them. I'm involved. And my message to people taking it and to myself is it's great to have goals. It's great to seek promotion if that's something you want in whatever line of work you're in. But I promise myself and anyone else taking the test that if you get what you want, you aren't going to be happier. It's just not going to happen. And we see people at our organization and other organizations, it's other firemen are nodding their heads that are listening. People lose their fucking minds when they go for promotion. They lose their fucking minds and they lose the plot when they get it because they have this thing built up. Once I achieve this goal and I get this bugle on, I will be happy. You will not. I promise you. And I think that's one of the things I'm most grateful of. I am so fucking far from perfect. I'm a clown in so many regards, but I am aware that I have in my life right now everything I need to be happy and content. I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 beautiful children. I have plenty of money. I like my job. I've got a decent sized cock. I'm good to go. Okay.
Wait, what are we talking about? Are we talking about 6.5? 6.5, 7?
I can't share.
You know what's more important, dude? It's the girth. The girth is what people don't appreciate. That's what matters.
Dude, it starts to mess with your head, though. And there have even, if I'm being totally honest, there's been points in engaging in even this little process in our tiny little department where I'm like, Dan, get back on plot, dude. It's great to work towards things.
Yeah, we're still talking about you.
Yeah, exactly. Get back on. It's great to work towards things, but when you make them bigger than they are, and when you have this end trophy in mind that you think is going to bring satisfaction, seriously, that's the reason celebrities commit suicide. It's like, wait, how did that person achieve that much and have that much money and end up killing themselves? It's because they thought that the next phase was going to make them happy, and it never did. Be in the moment, be grateful for the phase you're in, soak it in every day, it goes quick, and stop thinking that carrot out in front of you is going to be that delicious.
You know what, I read a book a few years ago, and although I was baptized, I think we've mentioned this maybe on this pod before, I'm not religious, but I'd say I'm quite spiritual. And this book is called Conversations with God, and it had one little quote that I thought really stood out to me. And it basically just said, the renunciate, and for those who are not familiar, someone who kind of like gives up on things, like the renunciate never denies passion. The renunciate simply denies attachment to results. Passion is the love of doing. Doing is being experienced. Yet what is often created as a part of doing is expectation. To live your life without expectation, without the need for specific results, that is freedom. And so I think that like that really hit me, because I think that when it comes to Bitcoin, and I think Daz and I have spoken about this, I am 100% committed. I am passionate about Bitcoin. This thing is unbelievable. But we talk about, as for what that outcome may be, I don't want to get attached to the results of that outcome. I'm just passionate about the journey at which we're on right now. And I think that's so important.
Amen.
Yeah. Another, what comes to mind when we talk about this self-actualization stuff, as well as stoicism. Marcus Aurelius's book, which is an ancient book, but it's incredibly good. It's called Meditations. If you guys are ever down, anyone listening to this, kind of in a rough spot, this is just a great resource for like really good nuggets of wisdom that are timeless. And I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It's just like this all-encompassing book that just makes you realize, like we've been saying here, everything you need for happiness, you've already got. It's in your own head. Like nothing, external stuff shouldn't be able to affect that if you've got the mental fortitude and understanding of how to accomplish it yourself. It's really it's very monk shit. It's good stuff though.
Love it. Love it. Was that topic number one?
Yeah,
Theoretically,
that was topic number one.
All right, should we do one more here? Whoever wants it. Another
You boys
topic
go.
here. Josh, hit us with something.
All right. Well, let me give you my list here. I think we should get bullish a little bit here. We've been paying a lot of attention to Fred Cougar, which his name just cracks me up, obviously. But we're going to have him on next week. So I've been watching a lot of his tweets, and he focuses quite a bit on the ETFs and what's going on, like how much these guys are hoovering up Bitcoin at this point. According to him and some of his charts, these ETFs are hoovering up Bitcoin at a pace that we haven't seen since the GBTC. What was the trade going on in GBTC in 2020? The ARB trade.
Yeah.
That's when like tons of people were tossing money into GBTC in order to capture that like 20 to 30% spread. But these things are doing it consistently on a weekly basis with what looks like isn't going to end anytime soon. There's a ton of desire for this thing out there. So what I want to talk about is assuming, and there's a lot of assumptions built in here, the ETF buying stays constant the way it has. The halvening is clearly happening April 20th, 420, coincidentally. And just looking at what's going on right now with the Fed preparing to start cutting rates, Bitcoin's halvening happening, these ETFs that are existing and just hoovering up supply. Where do you guys think this thing goes in the next year? I want to get uber bullish here, guys. Let's hear it.
I
Dude, his
honestly
chart-
don't know.
His chart, I'm looking at it right now. He predicts Bitcoin ETFs will pass gold ETFs in market cap in 2024. And he shows gold ETFs currently at 93 billion and Bitcoin ETFs already at 37 billion. It feels like this is happening awfully quietly too.
Really quietly.
I'm
the
struck.
mainstream is not paying attention. Google Trends for the word Bitcoin.
My phone's not blowing up. At this point in my life, when Bitcoin starts getting frisky, my phone starts to light up. That's one of my indicators. Nobody cares. People are awestruck that it's
nobody cares till it breaks the last all-time high. That's when you start getting those texts, at least in my experience.
I think
there's been plenty. Oh, sorry, buddy, I didn't see your thing. They're saying retail hasn't even woken up to this, and that's really where the bull market starts, is when retail inflows start to come in. And I think if just to circle back on those inflows, it was deemed to be a bit of a sell the news event when these ETFs launched, but it was only because all of these claims against GBTC were now convertible to Bitcoin, so those outflows were matching the inflows, actually exceeding the inflows, and we saw quite a big dip. And now that selling down out of GBTC has largely been exhausted, now we're starting to see that inflow start to creep up. And I think when the retail, same with me, like normally phone's pinging by now, with quite a big appreciation in purchasing power. But I do think
keep going. I'll be right back.
Yeah. I do think all-time high, the next all-time high is really where people start to get frothy about it and your phone will start pinging, but retail's not here yet. So I don't know what to expect out of this. I'm trying to remain humble and not set, back to that earlier discussion, expectation on outcome here, because I think what's really going to, for most Bitcoiners, what we need to think about as well is this could very well be the last cycle of the typical 4-year cycle. I'm a cycle maximalist until proven otherwise.
Yeah.
However, you just don't know, and I would I would heed caution. If you think you can time this thing and pick a top and a bottom, I'm here to tell you, you probably can't. And it's probably a silly idea to do so. And I also am here to caution against making big life decisions on a top, because we could very well be wrong in that regard as well, and it corrects significantly. So when your Bitcoiner mates are here and they become high net worth individuals in this next cycle, because we've been stacking their little asses off in the last couple of cycles, don't jump into making, like you said, walk in the firehouse and you go, fuck you, I'm not picking up that fat lady today. Piss everyone off because you're now able to retire. Maybe just roll back on that and just wait until we see how this cycle plays out before you make really drastic life-changing decisions.
You talked about tops and bottoms. Bitcoin can certainly be a top, but boy, can it also be a power bottom. And
yes, it can.
You can play all roles in the bedroom. Bitcoin can, I'll tell you that much. Sorry, go ahead,
Seb. It can be a dom and it can be a sub.
I was going to add that one thing that I think is fascinating is that at the moment, I think one of the reasons why we haven't maybe seen the movement in price that people were expecting is that there's a few charts that I've seen, and obviously the technicalities of Bitcoin, I should say up front, is not my forte. So this is just my interpretation of things. But we have still a decent chunk of Bitcoin, but it is depleting from exchanges. And I think until we move through that Bitcoin that is held on exchanges, we're going to see limited price movement. Because then all of a sudden, once that Bitcoin is moved off exchanges and there's no open, readily available supply, all of a sudden that's where price can get squeezed very quickly. And from my understanding of these ETFs, like this is where I think it'll be interesting to see how this functions long term. But a lot of these ETFs still operate under the traditional financial system, which is like T+1 or 2. So basically, when a transaction goes through, sometimes it will take 2 or 3 days to settle. So they're purchasing the Bitcoin post the actual transaction where someone has purchased the ETF. Because of that, there can be a discrepancy in the price between the Bitcoin price which the individual has purchased through the ETF and the price at which, say, BlackRock goes and purchases Bitcoin. So all of a sudden, what's interesting is if you've got you've got a ton of slippage, and if you've got very limited Bitcoin available, and then all of a sudden, all of these ETFs are trying to accumulate this Bitcoin a day or two post after they're meant to be purchasing this Bitcoin, prices are going to move very quickly. And so this is where I don't know where prices can go. I don't even try to expect to know where prices are going to go. But what I do believe is that you don't want to try and trade Bitcoin, because if you miss out on the top 5 or 10 days of Bitcoin's best performing days, you've just lost a hell of a lot of potential return.
Yeah. That emphasize that point cannot be emphasized enough, and needs to, if you're somewhat new here, and just the general theme of Boyd is looking at it, Bitcoin investing seems so simple when you look at previous charts. I mean, that's true of every asset, but it's especially true of Bitcoin. And you just got to stick with it. Time in the market's better than timing the market. It just sit the fuck tight. Because like you said, I think it was Clipston who tweeted something to the effect of Bitcoin's biggest price move in the last cycle, whatever percent that was in one day. It was something absurd. And he transposed it onto this cycle, what that would look like. You're a loser most of the time until you're a massive winner, and there's just no way to know when that's going to happen. That message can't be delivered strong enough or often enough if you're new here.
Yeah. Another thing that I was listening to a Spaces with Carlos Ari talking about these ETF markets having options markets opening in the next few months. What's interesting about that is that in order to have these options markets, they have to accumulate the spot, and they're going to have to do it from what I understood, what he was saying, very quickly, like an overnight, like we're going to have to buy a shit ton of Bitcoin. And he's talking about a gamma squeeze potentially happening there. But the interesting thing about what could happen in Bitcoin versus like GME back in 2021, when all that shit happened, they just shut everything down. They didn't allow the buying to happen anymore. That's not possible with Bitcoin. So you mix the fact that they can't shut it down. There's a very limited supply. It just gets wild to think about where things could go and how quickly. And again, it can whipsaw and surprise the hell out of you on the upside, and then surprise the hell out of you on the downside. So don't think just because Bitcoin went to 150 grand that it's going to stay there for any meaningful amount of time. It could be very quick.
And boomers want exposure. but they want it in a safe, traditional, what they feel comfortable with. So this is really what I think most of Fred Krueger's arguments are around, is people are interested in this thing, but they're shit scared of, of taking custody of it and having to manage it the way that you have to via best practice. So whether you like ETFs or not, they're here to stay, I believe. And most people, probably above the age of, I don't know, let's call it a number, 50, will probably opt in to get exposure through that unless they're already here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do these bears, these habitual bears, just start sounding completely retarded?
6
I mean,
years ago.
that's kind of what I'm wondering. I feel like for me, it's going back to that chart by Kruger. It's like when Bitcoin ETFs pass gold ETFs, when Bitcoin passes gold's market cap, it's like, when are your greens and shifts and all these other clowns gonna turn the other direction or disappear or whatever? The bearish case, obviously, we know this is volatile and it can go down a fair amount, but the full blown this is gonna fail type FUD. Nothing zero probability, as we said earlier, but it is starting to sound so intellectually stupid. It's almost like just an interesting case study in people being wrong and watching them be horribly and publicly wrong, and seeing what happens in that context. Because
it's just like human nature. They double down and double down, because it's like every time, maybe I'll be right this time and I'll be able to say, it's like somebody who's calling the shots every single year for 10 years is going to be right eventually. And then they highlight the fact that they were right, especially a lot of these like traders. Traders love to do this, like make calls. Then they erase the tweets after that doesn't work out. And then the one that does work out, they highlight to, all hell. And it looks like they know what they're doing. Like it seems like it could be one of those.
I think what's challenging is the fact that so many of these individuals, they're going to continually leverage this stuff. One, because Peter Schiff, I think, benefits from it immensely on his social media platforms and speaks to a certain audience. But on top of that, I don't think Bitcoin is still mainstream enough that when people come and look at the chart of Bitcoin, it does look like, it's volatile. It went from freaking 69,000 all the way down to 18,000. And so they keep looking at these charts, and the charts look very similar every 4 years. They're not really moving ahead and realizing any new understanding of Bitcoin. I think we keep repeating the cycle until we don't. And it's like, is this until we don't, this cycle? And that's what I'm curious about.
Well, and I don't know that the Peter Schiffs and the Mike Greens of the world have the intellectual honesty to admit that they were wrong when they're so dogmatic in their approach to being right against this thing. Quoth the Ravens just come out, and that's, from my mind, an example of a great a person who's able to exercise intellectual honesty in that regard, because he was skeptical. He had a small position. So anyone doesn't know, Quoth the Ravens are a financial podcast, and he's big Schiff fan. He's also a Larry Lepard fan. And Larry's the one who's eventually got him over the line. But he's been very vocal against Bitcoiners. And I guess it comes back to that earlier discussion around our dogmatic approach and our social media approach, that Bitcoiners have fun staying poor and all of that quite inflammatory language surrounding people who don't get it yet or refuse or aren't quite there. So Quoth the Raven was very public. Chris Irons is his name. And he was very public in saying, this is fucking ridiculous. You guys sound like lunatics. He's finally got it. He's finally put in a bit of time to understand the his words, elegance of the network. And it took him some time, because he wasn't interested in going that any bit further, because all he saw was this barrier, the barriers to his curiosity, because of the way that we went about quite cultish behavior around you're in or you're out. You either get it or you don't. Have fun staying poor. And I'm really starting to resonate with that more and more and more. And I think we've still got a job to do. We've still got a job to do in the education space, as people do come in and they do get exposure to the ETFs, around the counterparty risk with getting exposure through an ETF. So a lot of these ETFs have other investment vehicles. And if we do experience that pin popping effect of other asset classes, you only own a claim to Bitcoin if you have exposure through an ETF. You don't own any Bitcoin. And this is what the power of Bitcoin is removing that counterparty risk. So I think us as a community have got to get better at our messaging, because that message is still important and we need to get it out. But if we're going about it with that have fun staying poor, we're not going to be able to educate these boomers who are getting exposure through the ETFs to become curious enough to be able to say, hey, I need to know a little bit more about how to do this properly. How do I take custody? How do I get the benefits of what Bitcoin really means? The network is where the value is in all of our minds. But if I've just got exposure via an ETF, I've only got a claim to Bitcoin. I don't understand. And then that counterparty risk that does indeed exist with the exposure to other financial assets is real. It's low probability. You know, BlackRock, I can't see BlackRock going bankrupt anytime soon, but some of these other ETF vehicles absolutely could.
No, and I think to your point, Daz, as well, when it comes to the educational component, I think Bitcoiners, especially toxic Bitcoiners, we're so quick to just ram Bitcoin down someone's throat. And the reality is that people are not going to understand Bitcoin if they don't understand the problem. And so I always find like the best approach to educating, for me personally, has first understand the pain points at which someone is feeling in society. And if you're able to understand the pain points, and then you can define the problem around those pain points, people are like, oh my God, that makes sense. Now I know why it's getting harder and harder to get by. Now I know why like house prices are rising, cost of living is rising. And then from there, you can start to be like, well, what would a solution look like if we were to try and fix it? And that's when you can start to lay out Bitcoin. That's when you can start to dive down the rabbit hole.
Idea.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
The tough thing is that for certain demographics and individuals, the pain points are a long ways off. I think about this in our career. Like in our line of work, we're blessed to be at a decent paying, solid career fire department. Employees make a good, decent living wage. And for a lot of them, they can skate by over levered, not saving any money for a long period of time. There's this safety net, or at least appears to be a safety net of a pension out in the future. And it's hard to rattle their cage and say, yo, the amount of debt you're racking up and the current state of your cash flow is going to put you in a position 20 years from now where you're going to wish you did X or Y. That's just a hard case to make. And I've been at this case for a long period of time because before Bitcoin, I was super into personal finance and saving and all this stuff. And it's like, it's unbelievable. The people that want to hear it. And the people that don't want to hear it never do. And there's not some sexy solution here other than for a big segment of, say, middle and middle upper class. They are not going to have the freedom in the future that they wish. They might look at people like us and say, that must be nice. And it's like, well, it's nice because of decades of habits, right? Like, that I have this freedom. But like, getting that message across to people in the moment when cheap debt is available and they can just live paycheck to paycheck with a reasonably stable job, it's really hard to get this message across. It's kind of astonishing to me how slowly people are to change their behavior and how much they don't care about their future self in a way. It's just very foreign to me. But that's kind of been the reality of me proselytizing about financial well-being.
Dude, shiny objects are really hard, man. People love them.
Dude,
I was scrolling Instagram the other day, and there's a video of a dude backing into a spot with a Tesla Cybertruck, gets out with a Vision Pro on, and just walks away from the vehicle. Like, this guy's driving a $120,000 vehicle with a $3,500 headset on, but not to mention the fact that he's driving around with a fucking VR headset on in his vehicle. Complete insanity on so many levels. But that's the consumer culture, encapsulated into one video. That is it. That is by the numbers, like what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what that guy does. Hopefully he makes a shit ton of money because he better to be playing with all these toys.
People just don't think about the implications. I wrote this blog post years ago. I called it the money post. It was basically just a journal entry about my thoughts on personal finance. And there's this section in there called Cars or College. And it basically does the math in this section of so many people, back to our line of work. Oh, I could never afford to send my kids to college. I'm a firefighter. Yeah, you could. You see what's out in the back parking lot that you've been driving for 25 years? Let me do the math on if you got something different than that was still plenty, and we compounded that just with you in the S&P 500, you would have been able to send little Timmy and Sally to college, right? And people just don't think that way. And if you frame it that way, it can be helpful. But once again, it's startling. They go, whatever. I still like the Tesla out back, you know?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
the Tesla's better than a fucking gender study degree, at least.
I agree with that.
100%.
Yeah.
It's definitely. I think this cheap debt, it pushes everything off into the future, so you don't have to think about it. But you freaking bury yourself. Like I remember ages ago, I went ski touring with a few buddies, and I turn up in my kind of like old beat up Subaru, and I've got like 3 buddies that have like brand new trucks with sleds on the back. Like we're talking about like the Ski-Doo sleds on their own are freaking $20,000, and then you've got a freaking $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 truck. And I'm like, these guys are ski instructors. Like they're earning freaking $35,000 a year. How are they affording? And it just blows me. And it's all financed. It's all financed. And you're living that life. And again, to your point, I think when you're able to bring forth future spending to today, you can live a life which makes it feel like the fiat world is freaking incredible. Why would I want to live in any other world? And then you hit 45, 50, and your $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt is now burdening you. Like that's when you realize.
And guess what? Then you're a 75-year-old Walmart greeter. That is not the way anyone wants to live their life.
I think it's hard for some people when they don't have examples in their life too. I'm not going to share too much detail, but I have an example very close to me in my life of somebody that's should be way beyond retirement age that's still working non-stop and looked great for decades, right? Where they lived, the whole image looked fine. Well, things came home to roost, and back to having freedom and autonomy and being able to focus on what you really care about. You rob yourself of that if you don't have a crazy massive trust fund or discipline. You need one of the two. You need a huge trust fund or you need discipline. One of the two. Both work.
I got a pretty funny story from July last year. We had a Bitcoin bush bash in Cairns where I live. And I was picking up some Bitcoiners, and this old beater of a car that I've got had bubbled tint. Like, it's old, it's a piece of shit. And I'm like, I would normally be embarrassed to go and pick someone up from the airport to take them somewhere in this car. I would take the wife's car. She's got a much better car to drive around in with the kids, right? But then I sit there and I'm going, hang on, I'm picking up Bitcoiners. This is a badge of honor here. So I went out, picked up, and I'm like, look at my piece of shit. And they're like, impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worth throwing in the disclaimer, too, that nice shit fucks hard, as we've said before. Like, it's great. Like, stuff's awesome if you can afford it. If you can 100%. Afford it. There's nothing wrong with a nice truck. There's nothing wrong with a Tesla. There's nothing wrong with a nice house and being generous and all this shit if you can afford it. And most people can't. You know, my wife and I will drive around these subdivisions, be like, how are there this many? She'll say, how are there this many people that can afford these houses? And I go, 70% of them aren't even close to being able to afford these houses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Scary. One more quick topic before we hang up.
I say we let this be what it is right now. Daz, as painful as that is.
Cool.
Hey, before we stop this thing, I mentioned the Cybertruck. I want to hear your honest thoughts on what you guys think of this thing. Because
I would never fucking own one in my life.
It's the goddamn ugliest thing in the whole entire world.
Yep. Okay. Dan?
I'm not as bearish on it. I have a feeling that in person this thing's going to take your breath away. So
that
I'm
is one of the things I'm
upstream here.
I'm waiting to pass total judgment on it till I actually see one, which I haven't. I've watched a couple of videos of reviews. The panel gaps look like dog shit. Like the thing, have you guys heard that the like stainless steel panels are rusting on them now? Like people are getting them in the rain and like there's rust forming on the stainless steel. Like
Holy
they've
shit.
got apparently some serious fucking problems, but I don't know. I could see it going either way, but it looks like form following function too much. Like Elon had a piece of fucking paper and scribbled a polygon onto it and was like, make this a truck. And the engineers were like, what, we can't. And he's like, fucking do it. I don't give a shit. And I think he put these engineers through some real shit, man. Poor bastards that work for Tesla.
Yeah. I don't know. And then you've got to be, you know, Dan, I can't see you ever, because you've just told us about the size of your appendage. So I can't ever see you owning one, but I do see it being a major compensation for something lacking in that area. If you're going
for sure.
out and buying
yeah, 100%. We'll see a Cybertruck in one of the back parking lots of our fire stations, Josh. I guarantee you that someone's going to get one.
I can't wait to try to kick the side of it hard enough to dent it. That's the
You should
coolest thing
totally have
about
a
it, in
little
my
bit.
opinion. Like the fact that you can drive it to Walmart, park it in the front spot, and a cart can't fuck it up. That's a pretty big deal. That's a huge bonus.
I just love you. You probably saw, and I'm sure it was like planned. But you probably saw the initial release years ago, and he's just like, and it comes with bulletproof glass. Throws
Yeah, and he
like
threw the ball
straight
at it.
through the window.
Yeah, the window breaks immediately. He's like, bulletproof glass. Check it out. I'll throw this little metal ball at it, and it breaks him. He's like, oh,
So good.
that wasn't supposed to happen. Joe Rogan shot an arrow at the side of one
I
when
saw
Musk
that.
brought it over, like full blown compound bow with a blunt tipped end, and it just put a little scratch on the finish. Didn't even dent it. Didn't.
But who needs
Pretty
this?
incredible.
Yeah.
Who
I don't
needs
know.
this?
Nobody.
Firefighters that want to overconsume, Seb. We'll report back. First Cybertruck in the back parking lot. We
We'll
won't
put it
say
on
names,
Twitter.
but we'll let you guys know.
Yeah, but you know what? When I had my car stolen from the car park, of course I was like, "Oh, my car's been stolen." If I had a Cybertruck, I'd be pissed off. So I'm happy that my car.
Yeah.
It's a different world.
I'm doing well with my 2010 Chevy Malibu and Hyundai Santa Fe. But, back to cool stuff. One day, if and when, Josh, I show up in the back parking lot with something nice, I hope I can say with certainty I'm going to be able to afford it.
Yeah.
I'll
Dude,
buy you. I'll buy a new
You-
set of skis, and then you guys can come up to Whistler. And it looks like you're wearing a Steamboat Springs
I am.
t-shirt
Yeah,
as
we
well,
were just
Josh.
in
So
Steamboat. Do we have to get to Whistler? I'm going to push hard for our ski trip to be Whistler next year,
100%.
and I think we should do that.
yeah,
Be
you guys
amazing.
should come up.
Be amazing.
I think Daz better come as a pseudo honorary firefighter.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
We can't guarantee first class tickets, but we can get you a coach in Spirit Airlines. Maybe.
I'll see you in 6 months.
We love you guys. These are fun
Same.
as hell. We're going to do another one. We only did 2 topics, so we've got endless amounts to come, folks. Thanks for listening, and thanks for joining us, guys.
Giddy up,
Thanks,
boys.
Thanks a lot, guys. That was rad.